Good afternoon and welcome to BSides Las Vegas. Come on, cheer. Louder, louder. Come on, one more. Ah! Wow. Okay. We'd like to thank our sponsors, especially our Inner Circle sponsors, Critical Stack and Velmel. Yay. And our stellar sponsors, Robin Hood, Secure Code Warrior, and Paranoids. Cell phones, you know the rule, turn them off. Okay? I'll pass on the mic when you want to ask questions. The first three persons get socks. And feedbacks are available on the web, of course. And with further ado, let me tell you about Ty, as I lost him over here. Ty is a highly sought after dinner guest, is a security operational center lead and co-founder of Full Metal Cybersecurity. He believes that anything worth doing is doing not only right, doing right, but also being done with excellence.
So,
Ty.
Very good. Thank you. All right. My topic is understanding the human API, involving end users from authorized adversaries into our best defense. So I hope you enjoy it. All right. Pre-talk obligation. I just want to point out the last bullet. I will be using the word dudes, and it is intended to be inclusive. Cool? Cool. All right. So this is me. I do many things in many capacities, and we're going to talk about each and every one of these things another day. Here's the structure of my talk. My plan is to discover, better understand, and improve human interactions by mapping some basics of computer science onto human behavior. So we'll discuss a range of topics, including behavioral science, philosophy, and neuroscience in the human API fundamentals. We'll discuss our perception of security. We'll discuss what helps make a mature organization and security's role in business. And then on to the primary topic of security and end users, and then we'll finish up with the prime directive. All right. So this comic has a little more truth to it than I'd like to admit. But the ring girl has a sign that says data security, and the MC announces that in this corner we have all the cool black box technology, and in this corner we have Dave. And Dave is labeled human error. So this comic quite candidly points out that information security is becoming less about computer science and more about human behavioral science, or at least becoming more so. I suggest a frame refresh of some aspects of the security structure, refresh what security means, reassess our goals, and I'll offer my recommendations to maximize our ability to capitalize on opportunity. So to that end, let's identify and explore some key parts of the human API. All right. So an API, it's an application programming interface, and it is a particular set of specifications that programs can follow to communicate with each other. It serves as an interface between software programs and facilitates their interaction. Pretty simple, right? All right. Human API is almost the same. It's a particular set of rules and specifications that people can follow to communicate with each other. It serves as an interface to the world and facilitates interaction. Simple enough, right? So why is understanding this important? APIs make it easier to develop by providing building blocks necessary to realize complex actions, like potential. Potential represents something that isn't real yet, but we act as if it is real. That's heavy duty when you think about it. So we realize our potential by interacting with the world in a manner that would get us the most information. Accurate information is critical to optimal decision making. We know that if we put ourselves into a new environment, that new genes turn on in our nervous systems. It turns on new circuits, and they encode for new proteins. So we are full of biological potential that won't be realized unless we expose ourselves to challenging circumstances. By doing so, we put different physiological demands on ourselves down to the genetic level. And it's important to understand this so we know how to build more meaningful and productive lives. So I propose that the human API is split into two parts. And in a moment, we'll talk specifically about those parts. All right. So, but before that, there's a foundational piece to acknowledge. Within our reality, fundamental opposition exists in all things. Here's a video illustrating opposites.
Opposite day. Opposite day. Opposite day.
So volume wasn't great there, but I think I just turned up, so we might be all right now. I think everyone gets the idea of opposites, right? So obviously illustrates opposites pretty vividly. I think everyone gets this. So there's opposition in all things, and you can't have one without the other. So they're not enemies, they're only opposites, and the existence of opposition provides us with choices. So the two parts of the human API I promised to talk about earlier are represented as chaos and order, which are fundamental opposites because every conceivable lived situation is made up of both. They are the two ultimate categories of reality. All right, so we're going to start with order. Order is predictable. Order is the place where what you are doing is producing what you want to have happen. Let's see. My mouse is locked in there and it won't let me move over. That's weird. But yeah, order is predictable. Order is the place where what you're doing is producing what you want to have happen. Chaos is the opposite. Chaos is danger. Chaos is disorder and lack of organization. I don't know if you guys are South Park fans, but Professor Chaos was my favorite episode. All right. So, in a nutshell, chaos and order, these are the two fundamental pieces. Very good. And so the concept is the most that we can do to reconcile these two seemingly opposing ideals will help generate more success and more meaning in our lives. And so I'm going to elaborate on that in just a little bit. So, we're going to talk about some brain science real quick. Our brains are split into two hemispheres, left and right. Brain lateralization occurs when certain functions prefer specific brain regions. The left hemisphere prefers logic, and the right hemisphere prefers imagination. This categorization doesn't attribute or prescribe personality. It's just simply functionality, right? The concept is that in the natural world, we have a continual dialogue in the right hemisphere and in the left hemisphere. The right does a continual dialogue of imagination, and in the left hemisphere does critical analysis. If the left brain is too strong, it overanalyzes and overworks. If the right brain is too strong, it daydreams away life. They require each other to work together to function properly. The left brain favors order, and the right brain favors chaos. Like the cerebral hemispheres of our brains, these contrary forces are actually complementary, interconnected, and interdependent. So they're separate, but together. All right, so how does this mental processing help us make sense of a tough situation? An incredibly old philosophy maps directly onto this concept and will perhaps guide us to potential solutions. So this symbol here in the center, this is Tao. The Tao means potential, the way of life, the path. That's why I've got a picture of a path here. The Tao means to live in proper manner. So the orange side represents chaos, and the blue side, the orange side represents order, and the blue side represents chaos. So order is calm and moderately happy, but then we've got this blue dot of chaos right here. So this reminds us that order can be disrupted and plunged into chaos in just a few moments. So I like this image because because the texture of it looks almost like it's water, and it suggests that it has a depth to it. And so I imagine I like to think of this as a 3D model. All right, so when you're deep in chaos and you're in a hopeless state, when everything seems to be going wrong, and you find a critical realization, a little bit of hope, a little bit of order, a striking realization can pull you up out of the chaos and take you back onto the path, and order will resume in your life. So this is an important dichotomy because chaos isn't all bad. That's where potential, adventure, and growth lives. But we can't just hang out in order, and we can't hang out in chaos too much, or we'll be swamped and overwhelmed. So the key fundamental to understanding this part is that as these two pieces of our minds have to work together, and the better that they can work together and identify dichotomies, the better and more successful we'll be. And then and the more you do to reconcile these two, the more you'll stay on this path. And this middle path right here through the center, that's where meaning is found. And so we need meaning to protect us from catastrophe. And so if we have a solid why and a solid understanding of what we're doing, we can get through anyhow. So truth and meaning are critical to our survival. And so here's a quick video that I just gave you a quick sneak peek of Ronnie James Dio, and he's talking about truth.
Between the velvet lies, there's a truth that's hard as steel, yeah. The vision never dies. Life's a never-ending wheel, say.
So not all of you may have gotten that reference, but now I know where all the metalheads are in the room. So the lyrics to that song, it's a song called Holy Diver. The lyrics to that song are, between the velvet lies, there's a truth that's hard of steel, and the vision never dies like a never-ending wheel. So I think there's a lot of wisdom embedded in these old rock and roll songs, and essentially what he's saying is the more you can live in accordance to reality and what is true, the happier and successful and the greater chance you have of finding meaning are. All right. So, meaning and truth are critical. In this next video, Bill and Ted are in heaven, and they're at the pearly gates, and they're trying to get through. And so when they're at the pearly gates, they're questions, and they're answered, and they're asked in this video.
What is the meaning of life?
Every rose has its thorn, just like every night has its dawn. Just like every cowboy sings a sad, sad song.
So they're reciting lyrics from a Poison song called Every Rose Has Its Thorn. And again, living between the dichotomies, finding meaning and truth. That's the whole point of this concept, right? All right, moving on. So now I'll show how this principle applies to security. Often when you're making calls to a RESTful API, there'll be lots of results to return. A default limit called pagination or paging is usually implemented to prevent a massive response with thousands of results in order to make responses easier to handle. So it's a mechanism employed to impose order on chaos. Pagination is like perception. Our perception serves this function for the human API. So here's some more brain science. So it's not necessarily reality that shapes us. It is the lens through which our brain views the world. It is our perception that shapes our reality, which is great news because if we can change our lens, not only can we change our fulfillment, but we can change all personal and business outcomes at the same time. So that's a powerful concept. Let's define our goals that will get us down to this path. So let's revisit our perception of security. The Latin word for security translates to without care or without anxiety. Security, literally, means without worry. Security is the ability to do whatever is meaningful, unimpeded by an opposing force. Security exists to defend the organization and its people. Everyone can be secure and everyone can be defensible. The goal is to be okay no matter what. It means accepting the notion that it's no longer possible to keep the bad guys out of our networks entirely. It means that you're prepared to respond quickly to restore operations when it does happen. So this doesn't mean abandoning all tenets of traditional defense. It means accepting that despite how many resources you expend trying to keep malware and bad guys out, all of this can be undone in a flash. Sounds like that ordered chaos thing, huh? All right. Next piece. So security is an infinite game as opposed to a finite game. There is no static goal to cybersecurity. There is no finish line. There is no ultimate destination. There is no cyber nirvana. Until there are no longer people who use the cyber domain for bad things, companies must understand this and resolve to be fully engaged in this battle. So this next bit I'm going to quickly introduce in 5 lessons is from the Cyber Avengers playbook. So check it out at thecyberavengers.com. So lesson number 1, security is not optional. Information security is now a critical part of business, and a failure to adapt is not an IT problem, it's a business problem. An organization is like an arch, and security is that center keystone that holds everything together. Lesson number 2, if your company has a computer or data, it is a target for attackers. Even if you don't think your data is valuable, ransomware has proved this for us. And then at Malware Tech Block says, just because you're not important enough to be a target doesn't mean you're not insecure enough to be collateral. Lesson number 3, patch and update. Install security updates, run patches as often as possible. I know some of us work in environments where that's not possible, where you're stuck with legacy systems and they can't be updated. You're the extreme case, but as often as possible, patch and update. Patches are no good at defending against known vulnerabilities if they're not applied, right? Correctly. All right, number 4. Number 4 is really simple. Back it up. If you have data that you want to keep, back it up. And a key part is to have someone that's responsible, making sure that the backups are happening, and then when something has happened, that they have the ability to restore operations. All right, lesson number 5, constant vigilance. This is how you play the infinite security game. This is how you stay ahead of adversaries, is constantly patching, constantly updating, and doing everything you can to be proactive and instead of being reactive. So we're going to go over a couple of those models here in just a second. But the way you play this constant vigilant infinite game is to continue to practice good principles, defense in depth, and then we will get to a stable condition where we can continue to do what we need to do. All right. So this last piece right here, it's time to, like I said earlier, it's a time to take IT from just being a simple, this cybersecurity being an IT problem to making it an organization or a business problem. So it's time to invite cybersecurity to sit down at the table, and then they can be part of the risk management and the budget conversations to make sure these things happen at a pace and at a budget level that's not going to just drain the organization, because cybersecurity can be a money pit, and it's important to keep it live and manage it appropriately. All right. So this next section is about structures that get our security culture from basic to mature. So the Dow solution to basic and mature dichotomy is risk, threat, and maturity assessments. Each of these models are different, and this topic deserves its own talk, but time is limited, so I'll just briefly introduce the concept. So these models will help you assess your current status and help you determine if the risk level is acceptable and plan budgets accordingly. Here's an example of Batman's threat model. So he's got his assets and his protection and threats all lined up nicely, and then he's got little risk levels, and there's the legend down there: low risk, medium risk, and high risk. This is perfect. This is a really simple threat model system. And then I'm going to introduce just very briefly a couple more models. So this one was in Krebs Online, or Krebs on Security, posted this maturity model. Not only can you see where the red are parts and where things are vulnerable and need to be fixed, it's a good map of at a glance being able to see what's going on in each different department and what their security levels are like. This one shows how to take attitudes from a basic organization to progressing to advanced. And then this model right here takes an organization from reactive to proactive. Pretty simple stuff. All right, the next section we're going to shift focus to is the relationship between the IT department and end users. So rule number one is end users are friends, not food. Or restated, end users are friends, not foes. So end users will behave as authorized adversaries if treated as such. So to keep this bit at the top of our minds, we're going to add humans to the layer 8 in the OSI model in the carbon layer. So these sensors are configurable to form a resilient defense. From this section, I'm going to use tweets from real information security pros to teach a few security principles. So let's look at some examples. Sometimes we forget who our user is. As security professionals, sometimes we are so proud of this security baby mobile thing that we made that we forget what it looks like to the end user, and you end up staring up at the rear ends of these stuffed animals. And sometimes when we're delivering a product, like the comic over there on the right, it goes through all the various departments of the bottom right where the customer wanted a tire swing, all the way through the different departments of mistranslation of what they thought the user actually wanted. So perception and perspective is important. All right, this next piece comes to us from Swift on Security, and don't worry, I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'm just going to tell the story. The story is that a grandparent wanted to watch a video of their grandkids and inadvertently downloaded malware. They didn't want to get malware, they just wanted to watch videos. So this thread teaches us 3 points. If users feel beat up over security measures, it's 95% fixable through design changes in the interaction. Sounds like that human API thing we were talking about. So point number 2, users' machines that are provisioned with all the tools they need won't go download adware and spyware bundled programs from shady sites. Point 3, seek to understand, know user goals, and know what they need and provide it. If we understand user motives, we can deliver security in a way that sticks. All right, this next example is on the right. Dude Man 4 Win relates a bit that may sound familiar in this malicious compliance phishing email training. So he relates a story where he fell for a an internal phishing campaign, and was sentenced to 1 hour of security detention. And so to avoid going through this again, to avoid being thrown in the security violation boo box again and to put off undesirable tasks, he just simply doesn't open emails from management anymore. And so when they ask why he didn't respond to emails, he just says, I was being careful of phishing, and he doesn't get yelled at for dodging work. So when poor security awareness training is implemented, it'll lead to these poor results. So using security training as punishment and shaming users is not a good plan. This next piece comes to us from InfoSec Dio at JF Slowick, and he teaches us that, and he questions the effectiveness of canned phishing attacks. So I'm not saying don't do them, I'm just saying do them better. And what he suggests here is an honest security walkthrough by security teams and security professionals, teaching exactly what a real life phishing scheme looks like. Teach them the tells, teach them how to spot things. And then that way they're not going to be got by the obvious ones. So the important part is to build relationships with our end users to where they trust us and we trust them. Mutual respect comes out of it, and then they'll get better at being one of our best defenses. All right. So this is my last bullet in my attack plan, and this is the prime directive.
Be excellent to each other. Party on, dudes!
So, Bill and Ted, it's my favorite movie. I'm going to quickly break down the Prime Directive into two parts. So the first one is be excellent to each other. And this is simple. It's restating ancient philosophy. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. It means you help, serve, and sacrifice for others. That's easy. That's what being a leader is. Party on, dudes is a little more nuanced. I think the sentiment, work hard, play hard, is misguided and sounds like you're constantly pedal to the metal. Either way, it can lead to burnout. So I think it would be healthier, more fulfilled, and we find that we stay on the straight and narrow path if we work smart and play always. Party on, dudes means that people are going to wonder if we're working or playing. Right. So this is my final piece. This is my final admonition. Meaning emerges from chaos and order when impulses are regulated, organized, and unified. Meaning emerges from the interplay between the chaotic possibilities of the world and the ordered value structure within that world. If the value structure is aimed at the betterment of being, the meaning revealed will be life-sustaining. It will be the antidote to chaos and suffering, and it will make everything better, and it will make everything matter. So do what you must do to faithfully continue to keep the machinery of the world running. And finally, I'll conclude with the words from a former president. As security professionals, we are
dedicated to a proposition which was true in my time, just as it's true today. Be excellent to each other. And party on, dudes!
All right, that's all. Thank you. Sure.
We have time for questions?
Oh, you need socks?
Well, they want socks.
They want socks. I see how this works. All right.
There's one more.
Question.
I'm coming.
All right, there we go.
All right. Go ahead. Who's first? Raise your hand.
And to thank you for all your hard work and to help you remember everything that you've done. This is your most improved batch.
Oh, very cool.
It's actually a spinny thing.
Very good. Thank you.
Where is your mentor?
Right there, Mr. Tom.
Did you get yours?
So I
Go ahead.
wholeheartly agree that trust is one of the key factors in working with your users. But my overarching question is, how do you build that trust? And I know you could probably do a talk for hours on that, but do you have any tips on how to build trust? Because I know with perception being reality, sometimes they don't see the efforts you're putting forward to build that trust. So how do you build that trust taking into account perception with your end users?
That's a really good question, and it's a lot easier to talk about than it is to implement. But communicate with them. We're separated, in my current facility, we're separated from our users by quite a ways. You know, we're still in the same building, but it's far enough. But every so often I'll go down and be like, hey, we're pushing this new thing, and I'll key them up for it. Like, hey, this is what we're expecting, this is why, and I'll explain to them the meaning behind it and why it's important and how it benefits them. And if, you know, the sales team understands that, hey, this is going to help me make more money, they're usually all right with it. You know, they may complain about there may be some implementation issues to begin with, but if they understand what's happening and why, it usually goes much better. So simply just explain to them why, and interact with them. And the more they see you, and the more they know that you care about them, and that when you are making implementations, you know, in order to help them, they're usually more responsive. Is that helpful?
How do you help when the coworker just doesn't get it when it comes to phishing attacks?
That's a tough one. There are very click-happy people. It's a tough one because you're trying to get someone to care about something that they feel like gets in the way of their job. And whenever I feel like I'm doing well with security, I'm really humbled when I go through the airport and have to go through the TSA facility. So you remember what it's like being an end user in that regard. And so behavior, when it's taught and they change their attitudes about it, it'll stick. And so in order to get them to care about something, you need to incentivize it positively and not negatively. So if that comes in the form of bonuses or whatever, positively reward the good behavior that you want to incentivize. So rather than user shaming or say, hey, you guys that failed, you get more security detention, positively reward the people that do well. And so you make it an incentive to do well on it, and they usually respond better. Does that help?
Last question.
Here, training or awareness, what would you implement in cases for big organizations? Or do you even make a difference in that part? Is the same for you for this part or of end users?
If I understand your question, you're asking what's the difference between awareness and regular training?
What would you recommend? Regular training for the employees, for example, or just awareness?
Just for end user security training, what do I
Yes.
recommend? Is that your question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. If it's entertaining, it's going to stick. A lot of security detention training is just boring. And so there are a couple of vendors out there that do exciting, encouraging, gamified training. And I think that's really the key, is if you can gamify the training, it usually is a lot better and it's usually a lot more well received and people remember it, rather than trying to just pound through the computer-based training, fail the quiz a couple of times and then learn from the mistakes, and then take the quiz and then pass it at the end and then forget about it. So just canned computer-based training usually isn't effective, but something that you would enjoy taking is usually something that an end user would be good with. So the trick is finding a company that does it. But there are some out there.
Our guest speakers.
Oh, thank you.